Let my name echo in song! Strike!
Yeah! Skyward! Seize the skies!
Shipia! Really?
Let engraved names echo! Yeah! Skyward!
Shower me with praise! Let the world come alive! Here goes! Yoo-hoo!
Yeah! Skyward! Make way for the...
Clear the area!
Hear the echoes of the valley!
The Cloud Retainer, the bird, an electric bike enthusiast, and the OG single adoptive mother in Genshin Impact has of course returned for a rerun. But ever since her absence for about a year, you know, after her release, now that she's back, the big question as always is, should you get her? See, Xianyun enables plunge attacks for everyone. And that's really, really cool. It means you get to plunge with pretty much any of your favorite characters. It doesn't have to be a plunge specific character, nor does it necessarily have to be someone like Liyue who can do something like dragon striking. You can therefore plunge with anyone, and some of my favorite characters to plunge include Lisa, Miko, Nahida, and Hu Tao, for a variety of reasons. On top of that, Xianyun is also a team-wide healer, which basically means that you can actually play Furina teams with her as well, which is really, really good for someone like Hu Tao. For Xiao mains, she's also an insane buff for him, as well as any other plunge DPS character like Garming or upcoming Varesa, with massive plunge DPS increases on top of healing to sustain at the very least for someone like Xiao his HP drain, which on top of that means you can also sustain Furina teams as well, which is actually huge for someone like Xiao. And then you can also have the ability to run sets like Song of Days Past for even more DPS. So that's really, really good for someone like Xiao, and Xiao mains definitely were lamenting the days that they didn't actually have Xianyun, and they were rejoicing when they actually got her. But here's the thing, because on top of that, Xianyun is actually really, really bad for Xiao, in the sense that if you have Xianyun, you have no reason to get Xiao anymore, with the possible exception of a bit more damage and I guess a bit more AoE on his plunges. But at the end of the day, at least in my experience, that doesn't really mean anything for the most part. Generally speaking, if you have Xianyun, there is no reason to get Xiao at all. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic that we have there. That being said though, there is a catch. And no, I am not talking about the weapon that is generally speaking best in slot for someone like Xiangling. No, not that catch. I am of course talking about the actual catch when it comes to whether or not you want to get Xianyun. See, plunge gameplay is rather niche, and at the end of the day, it's not for everyone. Obviously, Xiao mains love plunge gameplay, and more power to them, but for you and I, there is a good to fair chance that you might not like plunge gameplay as much as you thought you did in order to actually go and get Xianyun. I don't necessarily regret getting Xianyun, because on the rare occasion that I do actually like plunge gameplay, I am very grateful for having her. But that being said though, it has been a rather rare occasion that I have chosen to do some plunge gameplay for whatever reason. And so when you don't have that plunge gameplay, the reality of the situation is you found yourself with a fancier Jean. That's it. And at the end of the day, if you happen to have C2 Jean, I feel like she's actually a bit better, because then you have attack speed, which is definitely something that you can use a lot more often than plunge gameplay, at least in my opinion. On top of that, I think another reason why I haven't been as interested in plunge gameplay myself is because of Xianyun's massive ER requirements at C0 are whatever, but not using Crane's Echoing Call. And that is because it seems to me that no matter how much energy regeneration, or rather how much energy recharge I can build on her, at the end of the day, I still need 2 skills per rotation, and with the cooldown of 12 seconds on her skill, it's rather difficult to weave those 2 skills in during the sort of setup phase of any rotation. So I've not been a fan of that myself. There are ways of fixing that, which I will talk about a little bit later, namely her weapon, or of course one of her constellations, specifically the first one. But before I get that, that has been, in my experience, a rather limiting factor in me potentially enjoying Plunge gameplay. So considering that Jensen is going to be on the Varesa Xianyun banner, and I happen to have a guarantee ready to go, I'm going to be getting C1 Xianyun while I try to go all out for C6 Jensen. So I get the feeling that is going to be a huge boon, at least for my personal enjoyment of Plunge gameplay. So we'll see how that goes. But either way, that's something I think you should keep an eye on, because you might not actually like Plunge gameplay as much as you thought you would. So now that we've covered how I feel about Xianyun from more or less a subjective perspective, I suppose, let's now have a look at how we build her. But before we do that, don't forget to subscribe and like the video as well. Did you know that when YouTubers see their subscriber count go up, they tend to feel better about themselves? And you want me to feel better about myself, right? Because when I feel better about myself, I feel more excited to, generally speaking, make more videos, and I guess we're all sort of, you know, benefiting from that as well. So it's a bit of a win-win situation, as Dory would always say. So definitely go ahead and subscribe, and don't forget to ring that bell, because that means you're going to be notified of the latest videos on the channel. Now, when it comes to building Xianyun, one thing I think everyone needs to keep an eye on is where her buff comes from for that extra plunge damage. It comes exclusively from her A4 passive, which basically increases all plunge damage by twice her attack, and that buff caps at 9,000 attack, which basically means you need to build up to 4.5k attack in order to max that out. But at the same time, like I mentioned, ER is a huge issue, especially at C0 and especially without her weapon. So at the end of the day, when it comes to building her artifacts, you're probably going to be using an ER sand over an attack sand. Otherwise, it's going to be attack, attack, attack. This is one of those few characters who is, of course, a healer, but I would definitely not recommend a healing bonus hat at any point in time, simply because, well, at base, her healing is actually really good. You don't actually need a healing bonus hat at all. But an ER sand is definitely worth using until you maybe somehow have enough ER, because let's say you're using her C1, or you may be using her weapon. So let's just quickly look at the weapon options that are definitely recommended. There's really only 3 weapon options available for her, at least from a supportive basis, which is of course Crane's Echoing Call being her signature weapon. This is a weapon that can alleviate quite a fair bit of her ER, as well as maximizing her buff potential by having that huge base attack as well as the attack percent substat. So that's really, really nice. Alternatively, you can of course use Fav. This has obviously been a famous weapon for dealing with ER requirements, but even then you still need quite a lot of ER on her, just not nearly as much as if you were to use a non-ER weapon on a C0 Xianyun. And then the other alternative that I have been using for the time being is of course Oathsworn Eye. Oathsworn Eye has actually been a bit of more of like a happy medium between Crane's Call or other 5-star weapons and Fav, in the sense that you'll get the ER at the very least, but you'll also get a bunch of attacks, so you definitely have a bigger buff by using Oathsworn Eye. It's still finicky, and you probably still end up needing to use 2 skills anyway before you can ult. So I guess at the end of the day, if you still need to use 2 skills to ult with Favj, then I guess you might as well stick with Oathsworn Eye. If you happen to have enough ER, then basically any high base attack weapon plus any weapon that actually has attack percent on it is pretty much the way to go. Now, when it comes to the artifact sets that you're going to be using on Xianyun, VV is supposed to be the default, but I found that VV on someone like Xianyun for quite a handful of my favorite teams gets way too finicky, especially the Hu Tao team, where I typically am going to be playing double Hydro instead of double Pyro. So as a direct result of that, I'm not really a fan of running VV, and so my personal choice has been Song of Days Past, specifically to be able to have maximized plunge DPS. But according to KQM, they reckon that Clam is actually slightly better because the bubble damage just ends up being better than that buff. I suppose that may be the case depending on who you're using as a plunge carry, but considering that Varesa's weapon is incoming, and when you look at that weapon, that actually looks like a very juicy weapon for plunge Lisa, for example, I suspect that might be one of those rare occasions where Song of Days Past may end up being better than Clam. We'll just have to, maybe we'll see, I don't know, because I don't think I've actually farmed a Clam set for Xianyun, but either way, that is of course an option. Otherwise, you could always just go with Noblesse. Considering that you do need to use Xianyun's ult anyway in order to be able to get the high jump just to begin with, then having Noblesse to give you just oops plus 20% attack is really, really good. That plus 20% attack should also be a buff to Xianyun's buff as well, since her buff doesn't actually snapshot anything. Like a later increase in attack for someone like Xianyun is also a viable option. And speaking of Xianyun's massive ER requirements, let's talk about her constellations, because C1 is huge. I feel like C1 might be one of the very, very few constellations in Genshin's 5-star character rosters that is like teetering on a necessity. Like if you're playing a team that has triple animo like a Xiao team, the Xiao team, then sure, you probably don't need C1 at all because you should have enough energy to hopefully battery everyone with a C6 photos on. But when you're not playing any of that and you're playing one of the multitude of other Xianyun teams like the ones that I like to play, consider that she's the only animo character, yeah, C1 ends up being a huge deal at that point. And so, what is C1? It is +1 skill charge. Basically, what this does is that it alleviates you from having to weave in her skill twice during the setup rotation phase, and instead you can just pump them all out and then use her ult immediately. This is huge because it's basically the same kind of constellation as Yelan and Baizhu, and I have found that that just makes both of these characters so much better to play. On top of that, it does actually, generally speaking, alleviate their ER requirements by actually a fair bit. And so as a direct result of that, I feel like Xianyun is more or less the same for that. It just makes her rotation so much smoother, and that should actually make me like her a lot more moving forward. But it's kind of scummy that you kind of need that constellation in order to make that a thing. So yeah. At the end of the day, if you want to try and alleviate your ER requirements for someone like Xianyun and you're actually willing to spend some Primogems, it seems to me, based on some energy recharge calculations that I've seen on the Discord, C1 is a bit better than her weapon. So there we go. Then we also have C2, which is a double the buff kind of constellation. Now at this point, you don't need any of her other constellations for her to be absolutely fantastic. But with C2, instead of her buff being twice her attack capping at 9,000, it is now 4 times her attack capping at 18,000. So that's basically how that works. You still only need 4.5k attack to max it out, but the buff is doubly strong. C3 and C5 are, I believe, ult and skill level increases. The skill level increase is completely worthless unless you're playing, I guess, DPS Xianyun. The ult level increase, on the other hand, is some additional healing. And here's the thing, I've never found a problem with Xianyun's healing, and I'm not even using a healing hat. So take that for what you will. Then we also have C4, which, funny enough, is extra healing from her skill. Again, I've never had a problem with her healing. I suppose the only time you may actually want extra healing whilst using her skill, I suppose, could be if you're fighting, let's say, a local legend, and that local legend has nearly wiped everyone out. I guess. And then finally, there is C6 Xianyun, which is DPS Xianyun. And obviously, if you want to go for C6 Xianyun, either you're massively lucky or you really want to play Xianyun, in which case go have fun, play a DPS build, go nuts. At the end of the day, if you love plunge gameplay, then Xianyun is 100% recommended for you, because she's really, really good for that, not just as a buffer for someone like Xiao or Gaming, but also just as an enabler for everyone else. So that's really cool. But if you're not into that at all, don't bother, especially if you already have Jane. especially if you already have C2 gene. Don't bother getting Xianyun at all. Let me know what you think about all of this in the comments below. How do you feel about Xianyun, and are you going to get her, especially because Jensen is on her banner, or are you actually going to be going all out for Varesa instead? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget that a Xianyun rerun is upcoming as well, so definitely you're going to want to, you know, prepare your Primogems for that as well, because Xianyun is her Xianyun, so there is that as well. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed. If you like this video, hit that like button, subscribe for more Genshin Impact content, and until next time, I will see you guys later. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Time to shine!
Make way for the attack!